Hello, welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. I am here today to wrap up the month of January, the month in reading, that is. And it was a kind of a slow month. I managed to finish 4 books, which is actually kind of on par. January is usually a slower month for me because I usually wrap up things from the year before, start thinking about the reading year ahead, and just kind of take a little bit of time to myself. That kind of continued into this year. I think the ultimate problem I had last year was that then I had unexpected surgery in February, and then the election stress and stuff like that just really stressed me out. So I never quite picked up throughout the rest of the year. Hoping this year is going to be different. So if you follow along and you saw my Friday Reads video, you know that I was hoping to finish 2 books over the weekend, and I admitted at the time that that was a lofty ambition. I did not finish them, but I am in a good enough place that I should finish them by the end of this week. So you'll be hearing about those at the end of, or not the end of, but in my next Friday Reads video. I should be done with them by then and ready to jump into my next books. Let's talk about what I finished first. The first book that I finished in 2021, I believe, was The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. This is something that I had not anticipated reading. I was very curious because I read the Hunger Games books when they were released. I really liked them, but I'm sort of suspicious of anything that gets like a sequel or a prequel a little bit after the fact. And that was the case with this one for me. My niece read it, however, and she was telling me about it, and she really loved it, and that kind of convinced me that I should do it. So I put a hold on the audio version of it. It became available, and I listened to it. It was a carryover from 2020. I didn't finish it in 2020, but finished it in 2021. And I was surprised. It was really interesting. There are things about it that I didn't like. There are things about it that I did like. I think it's very interesting, if you have read the previous books, seeing how a lot of the things that are taken for granted and just assumed that that's the way it is, were created in The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, because it goes back to the beginning, well, not the beginning, but the 10th annual Hunger Games. And Coriolanus Snow, who is the president in the Hunger Games books, is now like a high school student. I believe he's 15 or 16 years old, and he becomes involved in the games for the first time. And it's about the creation of the games, the creation of his political career. And that part is interesting. It's about media manipulation and punishment, and there are things about it that are very interesting, mostly if you are already a fan. I would say this is probably not a starting point. I would start with the original series, and if you enjoy them, move on to this. But I was surprised by how much I liked it, given that I had some reluctance to read it at all. So at the end of the day, I did enjoy it. Was it great? No, but it was very interesting, and that's pretty good. The next book that I finished in January is actually, and was another carryover, G is for Gumshoe by Sue Grafton. I have a copy of it that I forgot to grab, and I'm not getting up to go get it. So G is for Gumshoe. If you follow along, you know I'm a fan of Sue Grafton. I've been kind of, I had read all the way, I think, to P is for Peril, but I had read all the way to that point, and then when she died, I kind of went back to the beginning, and I'm slowly working my way through the series again. So I read G is for Gumshoe, and it's the first one that felt like it drags in the first half a little bit. Sue Grafton is very to the point and kind of blunt. That's one of the things I really like about her. And it just felt like all the stuff in the first half of the book does pay off, but it takes a really long time to get there. And it's the first book that felt like that. Like, I still enjoyed it. I still always love visiting with Kinsey Millhone, but it's the first one that really felt like it was spinning its wheels for a little bit. And you kind of start to wonder, like, where is this going? The premise, by the way, if you're unfamiliar, is that Kinsey Millhone in this book is hired to track down the mother of a woman who has been living in sort of like a hippie commune out in the desert, and simultaneously finds out that she has been placed on a hit list for someone who went to jail and now wants revenge for the people who put him in jail, one of whom is Kinsey Millhone. And those plot lines definitely pick up, but only in the latter part of the book. Still, like I said, I always enjoy Sue Grafton. I always enjoy spending time with Kinsey Millhone, and I will definitely be continuing to work my way through the series when I have time. The next book that I finished in the month of January is Conditional Citizens by Lalami. I actually listened to this on audio, although I do have a physical copy of the book. This is about her experience with immigration, how she moved to the country, became a U.S. citizen, but how her citizenship is treated as conditional, because always something less than, something that can be taken away or diminished. And it speaks to larger injustices in America. It is obviously a very timely book, no less because our administrations have changed over and we have a new president, but because I think this also speaks to other experiences that people have as conditional citizens in the United States. You could easily find parallels to like the Black Lives Matter movement and things like that, and just ongoing conditions about who is an acceptable immigrant and who is not at this point in time. And it's a very interesting book. To me, a lot of it felt familiar, like arguments and stories that I have heard before, but I still enjoyed it. I still think it's a worthwhile read, and I would definitely recommend it. Lalami herself reads the audiobook, and I thought it was she did a very good job, and I actually enjoyed the audio of it, which is pretty short. I mean, the book itself is short, but the audio is very short as well. So I would recommend it. And then the fourth and final book that I finished in the month of January is My Friend Dahmer by Derf, Backderf. I did find out that that is not his real name. So if you follow along, you've heard about this recently, but basically Derf Backderf went to high school with Jeffrey Dahmer and talks about how at that point in time, you kind of knew something was a little bit off with Jeffrey Dahmer, but they didn't necessarily know. And it's about how there were warning signs in hindsight, but he and his friends weren't necessarily able to pick up on them, and probably shouldn't have been expected to pick up on them because they were high school students themselves. But it does kind of wonder how the adults in the room didn't notice, because when he went back and interviewed teachers, and when police went back and interviewed teachers and guidance counselors, they said, well, I just thought he was a normal kid, and there were definitely things about him that were off at the time. And of course, Jeffrey Dahmer then went on to commit horrible murders. He was a serial killer. He committed his first one shortly after graduation, and then was dormant for a while before picking up activity again. And it's a very interesting story. It's a graphic memoir, and that reads very quickly. Of course, it is uncomfortable. I talked about how I used to be a huge fan of true crime, but true crime can feel exploitative. It can feel a little lurid, unnecessarily so sometimes. So for me to engage with that genre, there has to be something more to it, and this did kind of get around that, because it's a lot about the question of what Jeffrey Dahmer was like in high school, and if there were things that could have been done differently. And of course, we'll never know, but a little bit of speculation about that, and how things have changed as well, because it talks about how things that were permissible in high school in the 1970s certainly would not be permissible, or there are guidelines in place that would have teachers and adults looking out for some of the things that were going on in Jeffrey Dahmer's life, and perhaps would be different now. So that was an interesting book. I would recommend it if you can stomach it. One of the books that I was working on finishing this weekend is The Prophets by Robert Jones Jr. I made really good progress. I just didn't manage to finish it. So hopefully this week I will be completing this one, and you'll hear about it in my next Friday Reads video. I am really looking forward to finishing it. Still loving this book very much. If you're unfamiliar, it's about two slaves on a plantation. I believe somewhere, it's in the pre-Civil War era. I can't remember the exact year. They mentioned it in the part that I read. I want to say somewhere in the 1820s or 1830s, but I could be wrong about that. So these two male slaves are in love, and it's about the story takes on the narrative of a lot of different people on the plantation, and I think that is actually really interesting, because it shows the whole experience of what was going on and what life was like at the time. And it's harrowing, it's very difficult, but it is also beautiful. And it could be, I mean, a lot depends on the last 100 pages of this book, but it could very well be one of my favorite reads of the year, and we're only wrapping up January. But the same thing happened to me last year. In 2020, I read Song of Solomon in January, and it ended up being my favorite read of the year. Is lightning going to strike twice? I don't know. I don't want to put any pressure on anything, but I am really enjoying this book and looking forward to finishing it. The other book I was working on was The Prettiest Star by Carter Sickels. This is something I was listening to on audio. This is the story of Brian, who in 1986 is living with AIDS, of course, which is a death sentence at the time. His boyfriend has already died, and he, without any options, without knowing what to do, goes home to Ohio to be with his family. He had, I think I said in my Friday Reads video that he had been kicked out. That is not true. He kind of came out to his family after he had already moved to New York. He moved to New York pretty much immediately after graduating from high school, and then came out. And now the family is kind of struggling with his identity not only as a gay man, but his identity as someone who was living with AIDS and dying of AIDS, and the perceived judgment from their community, which they are afraid of, their religious beliefs, and squaring that away with the son that they love. And I feel like it's much more about the mother and the sister. Their perspective comes through a lot more than Brian's himself, and I want more of Brian's perspective. That has continued, but it is still a very interesting, heartfelt book, and I'm looking forward to finishing it. I should be done with this one by Friday Reads time as well. So those are the 4 books that I finished. The 2 books that I'm looking at finishing by this week, and then looking at things that are coming up. Obviously, the BookTube Prize octafinals round has begun. I am a groupie. I'm in Group E, and I'm really excited about that. I'm excited about half the books, as I mentioned in my Friday Reads video, which I will link down below, by the way. So February is obviously Black History Month, and I would like to read some books that would kind of tie in with that. Luckily, 2 of the books in my octafinal round would kind of fit that brief. Luster by Raven Leilani and Real Life by Brandon Taylor. I'm hoping I will get to them at some point in the month of February. If you follow along, you know I suck at TBRs. I'm really terrible at TBRs. It's dangerous for me to say that I intend to read anything because, life happens, things get in the way, something shiny comes along, and I think, oh, you know what, I'm going to read this instead. Just the way my brain works. For good, for bad, it's the way it is. But I would like to try to get to those 2. And it'll be interesting to see if I manage to get them in, because I think for my own sanity, I need to start with the biggest books that are going to be in Group E, which are The Mirror and the Light and Utopia Avenue. I might hold on Utopia Avenue, which I got from the library over the weekend, and do either Real Life or Luster, because I think either one of them would be pretty short and easy to get to, and would definitely fit that Black History Month brief. I think and there are other books that I have could potentially listen to on audio. I'm going to try to read all of my BookTube Prize books in physical form, which would free me up, because my goal for this year is to read 1 book at a time and listen to 1 book at a time. So hopefully, if I'm reading these in physical form, I will still have the opportunity to listen to some audiobooks that would tie in with Black History Month and fit that brief, because I think it's, especially with Black Lives Matter going on and everything like that, it feels like an important time not to let something like that just slip by. And obviously, The Prophets is now carrying into February, and it does tie in with Black History Month. So if nothing else, I will have this, but I would like to do a little bit more if I can, just balance things with the BookTube Prize, because I want to. I've embraced the fact that I am a slow reader, and because of that, I don't want to try to cram all of my BookTube Prize books into 1 month, which I did last year and stressed myself out. So I want to drag them out, but maybe because I'm doing that, I can get some Black History Month reads in, other than The Prophets and Real Life or Luster. So we'll see how that goes. Fingers crossed for me. Any other things coming up? I do have the Erratics from the library, and that's a memoir I've heard really good things about. I'm really excited about, so I'm going to try to squeeze that in February as well. It's not for the BookTube Prize. It's not for Black History Month. It's just something I'm excited about and happen to have a copy from the library. So hopefully there will be time to get to it. We'll see how everything goes. Like I said, last February, I ended up having unexpected hernia repair surgery for an abdominal hernia, and that killed my reading month. I don't foresee that happening in 2021. I hope that doesn't happen in 2021, but just point being, things happen. So right now I have a lot lined up, and I'm hoping to get to all of it, but life happens. So we'll see how far I get with any of those. I would love to hear what you've been doing in February, reading, watching, anything like that. I've been watching a bunch of Oscar movies, which I mentioned, and catching up on Mary Tyler Moore. We're continuing to rewatch that. We only have, I think, 2 seasons left. And I've been enjoying rewatching that show. It is my favorite TV show, and it gets better as the run continues, and I just love it. So I'd love to hear what you've been reading, what you've been watching, what you've been up to, anything you've loved, anything you've hated, thoughts on anything I have coming up. Put it in the comment section down below, and we will see how February goes. So if you follow along, thank you for that. If you don't, I hope you enjoyed this enough to follow along and see what it is I do here, whatever that is. But anyway, I will be back. Until next time, happy reading and happy February.